Chapter 1. The Mark Fuchsia village didn't exist on any map of the city. That was the point. It was 4 blocks of row houses and one corner bar wedged between a dead rail yard and a stretch of harbor nobody official ever bothered patrolling, which made it the perfect place for a crew like the Red Hand to set up shop for a while. They'd rolled in almost a year ago, 6 cars deep, more cash than the block had seen in a decade, and instead of taking the neighborhood apart, they'd done something nobody expected. They'd just stayed, paid the corner store double for everything, tipped the bar owner like she'd personally saved their lives, let the local kids hang around their cars like they were minor celebrities, because, frankly, they were. And there was one kid who hung around harder than anyone else. His name was Marlon Dade. He was 8 years old, built like a coat hanger, and absolutely convinced that the man running the Red Hand crew was the single greatest human being who had ever lived. The man's street name was Cardinal. Nobody used his real name, not even the people who'd known him for 20 years. He wore a red bandana knotted at his wrist no matter the weather, drove slow on purpose so people could see him do it, and had a laugh that carried half a block in either direction. "You want something, little man?" Cardinal asked him once, crouching down outside Ms. Odell's bar so they were eye to eye. "I want to run with you," Marlon said. Dead serious, the way only an 8-year-old can be dead serious about something this stupid. Cardinal laughed so hard he had to sit down on the curb. "Run with me," he repeated. "Boy, you don't even know what that means." "I know it means people respect you." "Respect," Cardinal said, "is the only thing in this life that don't run out. Money runs out, looks run out. Respect? You keep that till you die, and sometimes after." He tapped Marlon on the forehead with 2 fingers. "But you gotta earn it. Can't just want it." That sentence rearranged something permanent inside Marlon's skull, and he spent the better part of a year trying to prove he'd earned it. He finally got his chance, or made one, on a slow Tuesday evening when nobody was paying attention. Marlon snuck a kitchen knife out of his mother's apartment, walked straight up to Cardinal at the bar's back table, and dragged the blade across his own cheek, hard enough to leave a real scar, blood running down to his collar, face completely unbothered. The whole table went dead silent. "That's how you know I'm not scared," Marlon said, like he was announcing the weather. Cardinal stared at him for a long 3 seconds. Then he started laughing so hard he had to grab the table. "This kid," he said, to nobody in particular. "This kid." His crew laughed with him, not at Marlon exactly, more like they were laughing at the sheer audacity of an 8-year-old doing something that dumb without flinching. Somebody handed Marlon a bag of ice for his face. Somebody else bought him a soda. He was too young to legally be drinking around all this. For one night, Marlon Dade sat at the grown folks table and felt like he belonged there. "You still ain't running with us," Cardinal told him later, not unkindly. "You're 8. You can't even ride a bike without falling off it." "I can so ride a bike." "You fell off it yesterday." "That was a different bike." Cardinal just shook his head, smiling, and didn't argue further. A few nights later, trouble found the bar the old-fashioned way. A loose crew of corner hustlers, small time, mean about it, led by a wide, sweaty man everyone just called Higgs, rolled in looking for a free pour and a reason to start something. Ms. Odell told them straight up the Red Hand crew had already cleared out the good liquor for the week. Cardinal, sitting at his usual table, offered to cover the last bottle himself as a peace offering. Higgs took the bottle, smashed it across the table instead of drinking it, and told Cardinal he wasn't scared of him or his little crew, $8 million reputation or not. Cardinal just smiled, apologized for the inconvenience, and helped Ms. Odell clean up the glass. Marlon, watching from 2 tables over, felt something hot crawl up the back of his neck. He stormed out of the bar before anyone could stop him. "Hey!" Cardinal caught his wrist on the way past. "Where are you running off to?" Marlon ripped his arm free, except it didn't come free exactly. It stretched, 6 full feet of his own arm, rubbery and wrong, hanging in the air between them like a stretched-out rubber band before snapping back into place against his own chest. The whole bar froze. Marlon stared at his own arm, his own perfectly normal-looking arm, which had just done something a normal arm should never, under any circumstances, be able to do. "What?" he said. Cardinal's second in command, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Reyes, who never seemed to blink, checked the lockbox behind the bar where the crew kept their otter cargo. She came back holding an empty wrapper, the kind that usually held a single piece of strange, glassy fruit nobody on the crew had been brave enough to actually try. "It's gone," she said. Every head in the bar turned to Marlon. "I was hungry," Marlon admitted. "It looked like fruit. It tasted terrible, by the way. Nobody warned me." Cardinal put his head in his hands and laughed until he had to wipe his eyes. "Of course you ate it," he said. "Of course you did." He explained it as best he understood it himself, that fruit wasn't normal, hadn't been normal in a long time, that whatever made a person's body bend physics like that came with a price most people weren't dumb enough to pay. In Marlon's case, it meant his body now moved like rubber, stretched and snapped back no matter how hard he tried to make it stop. It also meant, Cardinal told him with a flat, serious look that didn't match anything Marlon had seen on his face before, that he'd never learned to swim. Not really? Not ever. The same thing that made him bend would make him sink like a stone the second water closed over his head. "That's it?" Marlon said. "That's the whole price?" "That's the whole price. I can live with that." Cardinal just shook his head again, like he couldn't decide if Marlon was the bravest kid he'd ever met or just the dumbest. The Red Hand crew rolled out a few days later on what was supposed to be a short supply run, leaving Marlon alone in the neighborhood with a body that didn't fully feel like his own yet. He was getting the hang of it, honestly, stretching his arm to grab things off high shelves, bouncing off walls just to see how far he could go before gravity caught up with him. He was sitting in Ms. Odell's bar, testing exactly that, when Higgs and his crew came back through the door, looking for a different kind of trouble this time. Higgs remembered the kid from the other night, remembered the bottle, remembered the embarrassment of being laughed off by a crew that didn't even bother fighting back. He decided the kid would do as a substitute. Marlon didn't go quietly, got a few good stretchy punches in, actually, enough to make Higgs genuinely angry instead of just annoyed, but numbers won out in the end. Ms. Odell ran for the block captain, an older man everyone called Mr. Pruitt, who showed up fast and got nowhere fast, because Higgs's crew weren't in a mood to be talked down. By the time the Red Hand cars screeched back onto the block, Higgs already had Marlon thrown over one shoulder, headed for the water. What followed wasn't a clean fight. Cardinal's crew didn't play fair and didn't pretend to. One of Higgs's guys pulled a gun. Cardinal's right hand put him on the ground before the gun finished rising. Another took a lit cigarette to the eye and screamed in a way that emptied the rest of the fight out of everyone watching. It was fast, and it was ugly, and none of it looked like the easy charm Cardinal usually wore around the neighborhood. Higgs ran with what was left of his nerve, Marlon still slung over his shoulder, straight down to the old shipping dock at the edge of the rail yard. He threw Marlon off the end of it into open water and didn't wait to watch him sink, which, thanks to the fruit, he did. Immediately. Completely. Marlon had never felt anything like it, the water closing over him heavy as concrete, his rubber limbs doing absolutely nothing useful, every part of his body suddenly working against him instead of for him. He didn't even have enough air left to be scared properly. He just sank, and the light from the surface got smaller and smaller. Something enormous moved in the dark water below him. Marlon never saw all of it. Just an impression of size that didn't belong anywhere near a city harbor. A shape too big to be any fish, too fast to be anything he had a name for, and somewhere above him, muffled and frantic, he was almost sure he heard his own name being shouted from the surface. Then, an arm wrapped around him, and the water tore open, and he was breathing air again, gasping and coughing and completely unable to process what had just happened. Cardinal had gone in after him, fully clothed, fully committed, swimming straight toward whatever that shape in the water actually was. It came back for both of them. Marlon didn't see exactly what happened next. He was too busy being hauled toward the dock, too busy choking up harbor water. But he heard it. A single, terrible sound, water and motion, and something that wasn't quite a scream, cut off fast by Reyes, hauling them both up onto the dock by whatever she could grab. When Marlon finally got his eyes clear enough to look, Cardinal was sitting up on the dock, soaked through, breathing hard, and missing his left arm from just below the elbow down. He was smiling anyway. Somehow. "You're okay," Cardinal said, like that was the only fact in the world that mattered right now. "Your arm." Marlon's voice cracked clean in half. "It's an arm. I got another one." Cardinal looked down at what was left of it like it was a mildly bad parking ticket. "You're breathing. That's the whole trade. I'd make it again." Marlon couldn't say anything. He just sat there shaking, half from the cold water and half from something that didn't have a name yet, while Reyes wrapped Cardinal's arm in someone's jacket and swore the entire time she did it. The Red Hand crew left for good 2 days later. Cardinal's arm was bandaged tight under a borrowed sleeve, and he didn't act any different about it than he had about anything else in his life. Loud, easy, already laughing about something with Reyes before they'd even finished loading the cars. Marlon found him at the edge of the block, alone for once, checking over the last car before it pulled out. "I want to come," Marlon said. No preamble, no softening it. "I know you do." Cardinal didn't even look up. Answer's still no. "Why not? I got the fruit, I got the body, I proved I'm not scared." "You proved you're reckless, which ain't the same thing, and you're still 8 years old, and I'm not putting an 8-year-old in a car with men who just put a cigarette in somebody's eye." Cardinal finally looked at him, and for once there wasn't a single ounce of joke in his face. "You want respect? Earn it where you are first. Grow into it. The block's still going to be here. So will I eventually." "That's not fair." "Nah, it's not." Cardinal reached into the car and pulled out a flat-brimmed red cap, the one he wore literally every single day, the one half the neighborhood had started low-key copying because it looked that good on him. He turned it over in his one good hand for a second before holding it out. "Take this." Marlon stared at it like it might be a trick. "Your hat?" "My hat." "Why?" "Because it means something to me, and I want somebody to mean something to hold on to it for me." Cardinal set it on Marlon's head himself, way too big, sliding down over his eyebrows. "When you're grown, really grown, not just tall, and you've made yourself into somebody people actually respect instead of just somebody who cut his own face for attention. I was earning trust. You bring that hat back to me, personally, wherever I'm at." Cardinal straightened it on Marlon's head, grinning again like none of the last 5 minutes had been serious at all. "Deal?" Marlon swallowed hard enough that it hurt. "Deal," he said. Cardinal climbed into the car, arm and all, and didn't look back as the engine started. Marlon stood on the corner, watching the taillights shrink down the block and out of the neighborhood entirely, one hand pressed flat against the top of a hat that was way too big for his head and would stay that way for a long time yet. 10 years passed before it finally fit right.
Chapter 2. The hat fits now. 10 years is a long time to wait for a hat to fit right. Marlon Dade was 18 now, broader through the shoulders than the scrawny kid who'd once cut his face for a laugh, though the dumb part of him hadn't changed at all. The red cap sat properly on his head these days instead of sliding down over his eyebrows, and he'd worn it every single day since the morning he woke up and realized it finally did. He'd spent those 10 years exactly the way Cardinal told him to, growing into it, earning it where he was. He'd learned to fight properly, badly at first, then less badly, then well enough that grown men twice his size stopped underestimating him after the first mistake. He'd learned every inch of his own stretched-out limits, how far his arm could go before it hurt, how hard he could throw a punch before his own shoulder paid for it. He still couldn't swim, never would. The water still felt like a closing fist every time he so much as waded in past his knees. None of that mattered today. Today he stood at the edge of the same shipping dock where Cardinal had pulled him out of the water with one arm missing, looking down at the only boat he could actually afford, a battered little 14-footer with a motor that coughed twice before it caught, which he'd bought off a retired fisherman with less money than it was worth, specifically because nobody else wanted it. "This is it," he said to absolutely nobody, since the dock was empty this hour. "This is the boat." He'd named it already, the Mark. It felt right. Marlon climbed in, started the motor on the third try, and pointed it out past the breakwater into open harbor water, the same water that had nearly killed him once and had been sitting in the back of his head as
He got exactly 4 miles before his engine died for good, which was significantly less impressive than the speech. The motor coughed, sputtered, and quit with the kind of finality that meant no amount of hitting it was going to help. Marlon drifted for the better part of an hour, cursing the fisherman who'd sold him the boat, before a storm rolled in fast off the water and made the whole situation considerably worse. He woke up. He didn't remember losing consciousness exactly, just a lot of water and noise and one specific moment of thinking, I might actually die today, inside an empty wooden barrel that had apparently been doing him the favor of not letting him drown, rolling gently against a rocky shoreline somewhere he didn't recognize. He kicked his way out of the barrel, soaked, furious, and immediately ran into a problem. The problem's name, he'd learned shortly, was Coby. Coby was about Marlon's age, small, nervous in a way that seemed baked into his bones rather than situational, and currently up to his elbows in fish guts on the deck of a boat that very clearly did not belong to him. "You can't be here," Coby said immediately in a panicked whisper the second he spotted Marlon crawling up onto the rocks. "Nobody's supposed to be here. They'll kill both of us if they see you." "Who's they?" asked Marlon, wringing out his shirt. "The crew. This is Alvida territory. You really don't know where you are?" Marlon did not, in fact, know where he was, but he decided about 30 seconds ago that he was hungry, and the smell of something cooking nearby was doing a lot more to hold his attention than the warning. "Is there food?" he asked. Coby stared at him like he'd just asked if the sky was purple. It took the better part of an hour, most of it spent hiding behind a stack of crates, for Coby to explain the situation in a whisper, for Marlon to get the full picture. Coby hadn't joined the Alvida crew. He'd been swept up by them almost by accident 2 years ago, a mix-up with a delivery boat and bad timing, and the crew running this stretch of coast had simply decided to keep him around as cheap, scared labor rather than letting him go. He cooked, he cleaned, he took the abuse nobody else wanted to take. And every single night, after everyone else was asleep, he dreamed about something he was positive he'd never actually get to do. "I want to be a federal agent," Coby admitted so quietly Marlon almost missed it. "Like, actually, for real, badge and everything, going after guys exactly like the ones I'm stuck working for." "So do it." "It's not that simple. I've got a record now, sort of, just from being here, and even if I didn't, I'm not built for that. I'm scared of everything. I freeze up. I can't even tell my own boss no when he—" Chapter 3. Nobodies. Big Joss Alvida did not actually want to fight. Big Joss Alvida wanted a story he could tell at the bar later about how he'd put some skinny kid in the harbor for talking back on his own dock. He found out which one he was getting about 4 seconds in. "Off my dock," Joss said again, stepping forward, close enough now that his shadow fell over both of them. "Or I start with the new kid." "I told you, don't think I'm gonna do that." Joss swung first, a big, lazy, overconfident hook that telegraphed itself a full second before it landed anywhere, the kind of punch that worked fine on guys who'd never been hit by somebody who actually knew how. Marlon leaned back out of the way without bothering to move his feet, and Joss's own momentum spun him half around, off balance, swearing. "Stand still." "Kinda hard when you keep missing." Joss came again, faster this time, genuinely angry now instead of just performing anger for an audience. Marlon's arm stretched back the way it had against the king out on the water, slow, coiled, almost lazy-looking right up until it wasn't, and the punch that came forward caught Joss square in the chest and sent him stumbling back into a stack of empty crab traps, hard enough to collapse the whole pile on top of him. Silence on the dock, except for the crab traps still settling. Coby hadn't moved this whole time, hadn't said a word. He stood frozen by the crates exactly the way he'd always stood frozen, like his body had simply decided a long time ago that freezing was the safest option in every possible situation. Joss dragged himself up out of the wreckage, bleeding from one eyebrow, somehow angrier than before instead of less. You little... He turned on Coby instead, which was apparently easier than turning on Joss a third time. You're done being useful to me. You hear me? Done. I oughta just... Something in Coby's face changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a transformation. It was just 2 years of swallowed fear finally running out of room to fit inside him. You're a coward, Coby said, loud enough that it actually surprised him, loud enough that his own hands were shaking from the volume of it. You've been bullying me for 2 years because I was too scared to leave, and the second somebody bigger than you shows up, you can't even land a single punch. You talk about respect, you don't know the first thing about it. Cardinal's crew rolled through Fuchsia for a year and never hurt a single... They were 3 miles out, the Alvita dock shrinking behind them into a smear of gray buildings on the coastline, before Coby finally found his voice again. I really am going to do it, he said, mostly to himself, hands tight on the boat's wheel like he didn't trust himself to let go. I'm gonna walk right up to a federal building and tell them I want in. Good. They might say no because of, where I've been the last 2 years. Then you ask again and again till they say yes. Marlon had his feet up, cap tilted over his eyes against the sun, looking more relaxed than anyone fresh off a fistfight had any right to look. That's the whole thing about it. Nobody just hands you the thing you want. You said it yourself back there. Respect's not a gift. Higgs taught me that. Joss just taught you the same thing. Who's Higgs? Long story. Don't worry about it. Coby let that sit for a second, then glanced sideways at him. What's the crown, actually? You said it back there like it was a real thing. It is a real thing. Everybody I've ever met says it's a story old sailors made up to scare rookies or sell rounds at a bar. Everybody I've ever met said the Fox incident was a story too. 16 years ago, Goldfire ate 4 city blocks whole. Grown men dropped their guns and ran. And now it's just something parents say to keep their kids inside at night. Don't mean it didn't happen, just means people decided it was easier not to believe it. Coby didn't have an answer for that. He just watched the water for a while, openly turning something over behind his eyes, before he spoke again. So what happens when you actually find it? The crown, I mean. What's the plan after that? Marlon didn't answer right away. When he did, it wasn't loud and it wasn't a speech, just simple, the way a fact is simple. I bring a hat back to somebody, and then everybody who ever looked at me like I didn't matter gets to live in a world where they were wrong. Coby looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like that was somehow exactly the kind of answer he'd expected, even though it wasn't the kind of answer he could have predicted 5 minutes ago. The boat kept moving. The coastline kept shrinking. Neither of them noticed yet how much bigger the world in front of them had just gotten. Chapter 4. The Outpost. The federal outpost sat at the mouth of the harbor like it had been built specifically to remind everyone passing through who was technically in charge of this stretch of coast. A squat gray building with a flag out front, a chain-link fence nobody had bothered painting in years, and a dock of its own where agency boats sat lined up looking considerably better maintained than anything Marlon or Coby had ever set foot in. Coby stared at it from the water for a full minute before he said anything. That's it, he said. That's the building. Looks like a building, Marlon said, unhelpfully, already steering them toward the dock. It's not just a building, it's the bureau. It's where you actually start. If you want to be an agent, you gotta walk in there and... Coby's hands had gone tight on the rail again. What if they laugh at me? Then they laugh at you. You still asked. That's not comforting. Wasn't trying to be comforting, was trying to be true. They tied off without much ceremony, climbed up onto a dock that smelled like fresh paint and bureaucracy, and immediately ran into a problem neither of them had accounted for. Getting anywhere near the front doors meant getting past a kid who looked like he'd been specifically built in a lab to be unpleasant. He was tall, soft around the middle in a way that suggested money rather than neglect, dressed in clothes too sharp for the actual work being done around him, and currently amusing himself by making a junior agent redo paperwork over a typo that didn't matter. "You," the kid said, spotting Coby and Marlon approaching. "This is restricted dock access. You don't look restricted dock access material." "I want to apply," Coby said, voice already shaking but somehow still coming out whole. "To the bureau. I want to be an agent." The kid, whose name, stitched in gold thread onto a jacket that absolutely nobody had asked him to wear, read Dorian Vance, looked Coby up and down like he was reading a price tag he found personally offensive. "You smell like fish." "I worked on a boat. That's not against the rule." "Don't," said a new voice, flat and unimpressed from the doorway of the outpost building. Everyone turned. The woman standing there wore the same federal jacket as everyone else on the dock, except hers actually fit the job instead of just looking like a costume. Sleeves rolled, sidearm holstered properly instead of for show, dark hair pulled back tight, an expression that suggested she had already mentally finished this conversation before it started. Her name tag read, Agent R. Castellan. "Dorian," she said, "your father's been asking where you are for 20 minutes. Go find him before I tell him exactly what you've been doing with your free time instead." "I was handling a security situation." "You were bullying a kid in fish guts on a public dock. Go." Dorian opened his mouth, reconsidered whatever he'd been about to say, and stalked off toward the building with the specific, wounded dignity of someone who knew he'd just lost in front of an audience and hated it. Castellan turned her attention to Coby and Marlon, like nothing dramatic had just happened at all. "You said you want to apply," she said to Coby. Yes, ma'am. I want to be an agent." "You smell like a fish market." "I worked on a boat for 2 years. Against my will, mostly, but I learned how to gut, clean, and cook just about anything that swims, and I'm not scared of hard work. I freeze up sometimes, but I'm trying to fix that, and I really genuinely want this." Castellan held up a hand, cutting him off, and studied him for a long moment in total silence. "Why," she asked, "should I believe any of that?"